everyone. Welcome back to the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for the latest episode of Broncos Now. As always, I'm your host, Sydney Jones, and the Broncos hit the road to head to Los Angeles tomorrow. We'll hear from head coach Sean Payton today for the final time ahead of Sunday's matchup, and Broncos lead writer Eric Delala joins the show for a game preview. All that and more coming up. The Denver Broncos hit the road to head to Los Angeles tomorrow for an AFC West showdown versus the Chargers. We heard today from head coach Sean Payton as he met the media for the final time ahead of Sunday's matchup, and he talked about how they look to address some of the miscues they had last week in Houston.
One thing that I've learned, and as a young coach, I was poor at this, when you're just getting started, you address everything always. You don't realize that when you're doing that, by addressing everything always, you're not really addressing anything then. In other words, so with wisdom and experience, you learn what to ignore and what to clean up and correct so that the points you're making are noticeable. And so the same thing after a game, like, something will happen on a play and the coaches will be talking, and they're over on the sidelines. And I said, we're not running that again. Stop. Let's get on to the net. We'll clean that up next week. Now, if there's something that is a staple, a basic, but learning what to ignore, what to correct, and then examining. I think as a teacher, we always have to examine the why. Did we explain it well enough? Did we cover it well enough? How could we have done a better job ourselves? And so if you hand out a test to your students and 2/3 of them are getting C's and D's, then you have to look at yourself. So when we have a game like last week, it starts with looking inward, like, all right, whether it's the 1 o'clock start time on the, all of that, you gotta look as to, if we always say this in the staff meeting, if we played the game again, what are some things we would have done different? That kind of thing. So you have to look that way as a teacher.
He also talked about how this team is approaching the last quarter of the season here.
Look, your preparation, your attention to detail, all of that is consistent. In other words, your routine and your schedule is the same. Obviously, you get this late in the season, there's more video on the opponent. But I don't think you're necessarily changing things because you're in this routine and look, when those games matter, there's a little bit of a heightened awareness, I would say.
Let's take a look at this week's final injury report. Running back Samaje Perine did not practice on Friday, and he is listed as questionable for Sunday's game. Everyone else was a full participant and did not receive a game status. Now joining me on today's episode for a game preview is Broncos lead writer Eric Delala. Eric, thanks for joining me today.
You got it, Sid.
We got a big AFC West matchup on the road, Eric. Should be a fun one. I know the Broncos have not won in SoFi Stadium, and it's been a little bit of time since they won on the road versus a division opponent, too.
Yeah,
so
it really has. And certainly the Broncos, they struggled a lot since Super Bowl 50, right? Mm-hmm. And so you'd expect home record, loss, or road record, all those sorts of things. We hear Sean Payton say a lot. Good teams win on the road. They win at home. They win in domes. They win outside. To go along with the Broncos' struggles over the last few years is that AFC West record. The last road division game they won was back in 2019. I believe Joe Flacco was still the starting quarterback. So it has been a little bit of a struggle, but we've seen the Broncos break some other streaks this year. Obviously, the one of the Chiefs, the Monday Night Football streak, prime time in general. So, winning streak, the length of it in terms of winning 5 games in a row. So hopefully this is just another one the Broncos can add to the list of streaks that they've snapped here. And, I'm interested to see how the team responds after a loss to Houston. In previous years, I think we've seen losses. They've kind of spiraled into another one. They've stacked. It's been hard for this team to just get off the skid after one game. I believe in this team's resilience, its ability to respond to adversity, the way that it bounces back. Certainly there's been times this year, even in individual games, where it seemed like the Broncos have had their backs against the wall, and they've responded every time here, and they've put themselves in a good spot with 5 games to go, and I feel decent here about the Broncos' ability to go on the road, get back in the win column, and get a road division win.
Definitely, yeah. Eric, we heard earlier in the show from head coach Sean Payton, and he talked about how to kind of the coaching staff and the team approaches some of the miscues and mistakes that they've made in previous weeks, looking back last week in Houston. So, looking at specifically the offense, kind of what are the keys that you hope to see them really improve on as they've had a full week of practice now?
Well, I think the communication is the big thing, and just executing on the road with crowd noise.
Yeah.
Obviously, in Buffalo, we saw a lot of penalties. Yeah. Wasn't necessarily the same thing in Houston, but we did see in terms of maybe not being on the same page all the time, those things kind of popped up a little bit. So have the Broncos found a way to make sure that communication is seamless, to make sure that you cut out those penalties, to make sure you're playing clean football? On first and second down, I think the Broncos can play pretty similarly to how they did in Houston. They had a lot of short third downs. It's just a matter of executing kind of on that key down and finding ways to stay on the field, to gain control of the time of possession, to string drives together. Those things are all important. But I think on the road in particular, it's about focus. It's about attention to detail, things that maybe you can get away with at home, just in terms of the communication. It doesn't work as well on the road. And Sean Payton talked about that, I believe, Monday. He said it's a little discouraging at this point in the season to still see those things. But hopefully the Broncos dial in here. We've seen all year the focus on attention to detail, and Sean Payton talking about how the little things matter. And so hopefully this weekend we see that come to fruition and the Broncos are able to improve on offense and score some points.
Yeah. Eric, specifically on offense, who do you want to see step up for this Broncos team?
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens with Samaje Perine, right? He's listed as questionable, did not practice on Friday, but I think either way, Javonte Williams is a guy. He was named the Ed Block Courage Award winner this week. Just been really impressive in his return from that brutal knee injury a year ago. And he, I think at times over the last few weeks, has shown his ability to be that workhorse type guy, get ahead of steam, run through some people. I think the Broncos, and again, there's an opportunity always to throw the ball down the field, and Sean Payton has talked about how the passing offense needs to be better.
Yeah.
But that said, I think the Broncos have shown they can find success running the football and dominating time of possession and kind of playing that physical style. And I think that starts with Javonte Williams, obviously. And, if he's able to get going, maybe break a couple, kind of wear these guys down so that in the third, fourth quarter, you're able to keep running the ball effectively. I think that would just be a good boost for this Broncos offense. And then from there, you go to play action, and Russell Wilson, obviously the splits there in terms of play action versus no play action. Yeah. The Broncos offense has been more effective in that play action setting. So if Javonte Williams runs the ball well, Russell Wilson is then able to go to play action, take some deep shots. Maybe you see, like against the Browns, Cortland Sutton had a couple of those crossers across the field.
Right.
Those can be big plays, and it can give the Broncos a chance to score some points here. But I think it's about getting back to what's worked well over the last few weeks, and that's been running the football. And so I'll be watching Javonte Williams.
Yeah. Eric, as you talk about, getting back to running the football well, what do you know then about the Chargers' run defense? I mean, specifically Khalil Mack.
Yeah. I mean, he's going to be able to stop you in the run game, obviously, and then as a pass rusher, just very effective. And I think running the football can help keep that pass rush off balance and not let them pin their ears back and go. And if you're in 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11, that's an opportunity where Khalil Mack's going to be able to get after you, and he's got a league-leading 15 sacks. And so you don't want to put him in that position where he can do that. And I think if you look back at the Cleveland game when the Browns obviously have Myles Garrett, who was leading the league in sacks at that point, the Broncos ran the ball well, used screen passes, were able to stay ahead of the chains, and they prevented these pure passing situations where you knew they were going to drop back and Myles Garrett could just kind of get after the quarterback. And so hopefully the Broncos are able to do the same against Khalil Mack and the Chargers. The Chargers have struggled on defense at times this season, but certainly they've been much better in recent weeks. We saw, I think the Ravens scored 20 points a couple of weeks ago, and then the Patriots were shut out at home a week ago, and then we just saw that New England team beat the Steelers here on Thursday night. So the Chargers defense, Brandon Staley kind of takes from that Vic Fangio style of defense. It certainly can attack you at times, and the Broncos, I think, just need to play clean football more than anything and make sure they don't turn the ball over. And if they can get takeaways on defense, great, but I think it's got to start with playing clean football, no turnovers, no penalties, or minimize the penalties at least on the offensive side.
Right. Now, Eric, on the other side of the ball for the Chargers, I mean, quarterback Justin Herbert and wide receiver Keenan Allen, what makes them such a dynamic duo, and how do you think this Broncos secondary is going to fare going up against them?
Yeah, Keenan Allen he's a good football player.
Yeah.
He's been a good football player for a long time. Catches a lot of passes, gets a lot of targets. Herbert's numbers aren't quite where they've been the last few years. I think on pace to throw for fewer than 30 touchdowns, which he was able to cross that mark in each of his first 2 seasons. But he's still a good football player and can make any throw, has the ability to extend plays, has that mobility, which makes it tough from a pass rushing standpoint. Can't just kind of tee off. You got to be aware of his ability to get out of the pocket. And then with Keenan, I think you just realize he's going to make his plays at times. I think the big thing for the Broncos secondary, and whether it's Pat Surtain on him, whether it's somebody else, can you make it so that a big Keenan Allen play goes for 15 yards instead of 50 yards? Right. I think an issue last week that we saw in the first quarter and the first half a little bit to that extent as well was just the huge chunk plays. There were 2 plays of over 50 yards. I think there was another 40-yarder. There were some ones over 25 yards. And it just, that one play can mean points because, on some of those drives, the Broncos held them on 3rd down, the Texans I'm talking about, and one 52-yard pass puts you in field goal range. It doesn't matter if you get another 1st down. And so can you prevent that from happening? Because then you're, even if you're perfect from there, you're still giving up points. And so, can you make it so that it's a 25-yard pass, and then if you're able to get off the field on the next series, they don't get points. So that's what I look at is, can you find a way to stop those huge kind of back-breaking plays that are also momentum plays, right, in terms of getting the home crowd fired up, the offense fired up. In the second half against Houston, C.J. Stroud and the Texans didn't really do that. And so we saw them adapt really well, the Broncos, but they've got to do that from the start to make sure that the Chargers don't get going, because when they're at their best, this offense can score a lot of points. They can put up 35 points. They can put up 40 points. Can't let them get going. And I think if I trust this defense, if you make them work their way down the field kind of slowly and then bow up in the red zone, that's a recipe for success for this defense. Got to make sure they don't get the big plays, the chunk ones that lead to easy points.
Eric, I know I ask you this every week, but I'm going to continue to ask you, what would a win mean for this team at this point in the season against, an AFC rival?
Yeah, I mean, we're at a point where the Broncos probably need 4 wins in their final 5 games to get in the postseason. It's possible, especially after a Steelers loss last night, that you could win 9 and maybe get in if some things go your way. But if you're the Broncos and you want to essentially control your own destiny, getting to that 10-win mark is really important. And so, Sean Payton has talked before about that nameless, faceless opponent, and I think this goes back to that, where you've just got to look at each of these as an opportunity, and it doesn't matter if it's a division game. It doesn't matter if it's a division road game. It doesn't matter if it's Justin Herbert. You've just got to have a good plan and go in there and execute and find a way to get a win and get to 7-6. And if you get to 7-6, I don't think it's enough, even if all the other results around the league go your way. It's not enough this week to put you kind of in that playoff mix, in the like playoff standings. I think you'd be below the 7th seed, but what it would do is create a huge cluster of teams probably at 7-6 or within a game, half a game of that, and it would give you a chance moving forward. And so we got to see if the Broncos can do it, and I think that's exciting. Certainly, if this team can start a little bit faster, I like their chances. I think one thing we saw a year ago was the Broncos often started fast, and then they weren't able to maintain it. And I think they've been better this year at starting fast and then keeping that going. Certainly against Houston, they didn't score in the first quarter. They fall behind, I believe, 13-0. And it was too much to overcome. But then you look at quarters 2 through 4 of that game, and the Broncos probably outplayed the Texans, certainly outscored them. And I think, like we said after the game, had that gone on another 10, 15 minutes, I feel good about the Broncos' chances of winning that football game.
Definitely.
This isn't as early of a kick. It's a 1 o'clock Pacific time, which will feel like a normal kick here, 2:25. So can the Broncos kind of get going from the start, get an early lead, put themselves ahead, get a defensive stop against Herbert, and put themselves in good position to win this football game? I think that first 5, 7, 8 minutes of the game is going to be really big. And then coming out of halftime, we've heard Sean Payton, he just said on Friday, at halftime he's going to look at scripting some plays coming out of the locker room. That stretch is big there too. And, can the Broncos, they've been so good before the half and at end of games for the most part.
Yeah.
And they find a way to get back to their success
third quarter
on the first drive of the first half and then find some success for really, they haven't done it much this season. Can they find that success there? Broncos are close to being a really complete football team and kind of not having to worry about being in so many of these one-score close games.
Right.
But got to find a way to go play clean football, good football, get back to taking away the ball a little bit on defense, and see if you can get a win. Yeah,
hopefully they'll take that next step this weekend. I feel good about it, Eric. I'm excited for the game.
It should be a good one. I think it'll be close. I think it'll be exciting, and a win would be huge.
Huge, for sure. Well, Eric, appreciate you coming on the show today.
You got it, Sid.
Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of Broncos Now, Broncos Country. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll meet you right back here on the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube Monday following the game. I'll see you all then.